What's up? Alexander here with Date Psychology. So, today we're going to talk about retroactive jealousy. What is that? What are we looking at? I'm going to go over jealousy briefly to give you a background of the research of this concept, this idea, this emotion. And then going forward into retroactive jealousy. What is that? So, going forward, understanding jealousy, okay? We have trait jealousy and state jealousy, right? You've probably felt jealous at some point in your life. This would be an emotion that you have experienced, right? But we have state jealousy in that case. We also have trait jealousy. So we experience feelings of jealousy, emotions, often in response to something, some kind of threat, a perceived rival. But there's also trait jealousy, right? Some people are just more jealous across the board as a feature of their personality. They experience and feel more jealousy. Jealousy is easily evoked in them more than in other individuals. So, state, trait. Going on to the next slide. We have this idea, first characterized by Sigmund Freud, of rational jealousy and morbid jealousy or pathological jealousy. What does that mean? Let's say someone does something to make you jealous. Your girlfriend walks across the bar and kisses another man on the lips. You're jealous. You have good reason to be jealous, you know. It's not an irrational feeling. Rational jealousy. Something did someone to make you jealous. Then there's pathological jealousy. A state of prolonged jealousy, insecurity, that sort of a thing, kind of for no good reason. Imagine that your girlfriend acts in a way that shows you she's completely faithful to you, but nonetheless, you're suspicious all the time. Is she cheating on me? What's she doing? Who's she talking to? What does this mean? What does that mean? That could be called morbid jealousy or pathological jealousy. It might be related to anxiety in a sense. As anxiety is prolonged, we might also see that kind of with this pathological jealousy. Let's go on. Jealousy manifests in our cognitions, our behavior, and our emotions. So what are cognitions? Your thoughts, right? The actual narratives that you're telling yourself. The stories in your mind, okay? Behavior, how you respond to that. So let's say your girlfriend walks across the bar and she talks to another guy. You have cognitions, right? You think she's just having a friendly chat, or you think she's flirting with him. She's giving him her phone number. They're having an affair, right? The exact same situation, perhaps ambiguous, but your cognitions can change how you interpret that. And then you have behavior. How do you respond to that? Do you walk over and punch him in the face? Do you walk over and say hello and introduce yourself? Different behaviors as far as how you respond. And of course the emotion, right? The feeling of jealousy, that state of jealousy that we covered. Does that even make you jealous to begin with if your girlfriend walks across the bar and simply speaks to some other man? Does it evoke immediate feelings of jealousy to see her speak to someone else or not? Okay, let's go on. We have related to this kind of anxious jealousy, preventative jealousy, and reactive, right? So preventative is kind of behavior, as we saw in the last slide, right? Actions taken to stop a partner from engaging in certain behaviors. So you might have like monitoring partners. What are they doing? Telling them you cannot talk to that person. You go across the bar and you pull her away. You say, do not talk to that man, right? You have anxious jealousy, which is kind of related to pathological jealousy or morbid jealousy in the Freudian model as well. Suspected jealousy, often without a reason. It can be suspicious, a general distrust, a kind of rumination. You know, you go home and you worry the next week. What was she doing talking to that man? What did they say? What kind of conversation did they have? And so on and so on. And reactive, right? Your response to that infidelity. How do you react? How do you deal with it? How do you cope, so to speak? And so we're going to be looking at a paper here going forward. Types of jealousy. They differentially predict cost-inflicting and benefit provisioning mate retention strategies. So a little bit of evolutionary psychology. Let's go forward and see what that is. Why do we experience jealousy in the first place? We have this emotion. Probably in that case, it's adaptive. You know, there's a reason we have it. What is that reason? So it probably facilitates mate retention, right? You have kind of that reactive jealousy. You have the behavior. What do you do? In an ancestral environment, if there was a rival, maybe you could go and kill him or beat him up or something like that. Doesn't seem to work so well in a modern environment to do things like that, does it? People have to engage in other strategies. So you might see a mismatch with this feeling of jealousy in response to rivals and the behaviors that it might elicit naturally, so to speak, and what you can actually get away with in a modern environment. So they might not always work. And there are two ways that people can kind of do this. They're called cost inflicting or benefit provisioning. When some people feel jealous, they engage in more benefit provisioning behavior. They think, I'm going to be better. I'm going to do what I need to do to retain a mate, to keep his or her interest in me. And then cost inflicting is like, I'm going to punish him or her for inflicting jealousy upon me, so to speak. I'm going to tell her, you can't do this, you can't do that, yada, 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 that sort of a thing. Let's go forward to the next slide. What do we know about this cost inflicting and that sort of a thing? So when people engage in these cost inflicting strategies for jealousy, it's often associated with lower relationship satisfaction across the board. So typically they're not good. They're often negative behaviors. They don't seem to help as far as relationship satisfaction goes. What else do we know? People that have a lot of cognitive and anxious jealousy, the people that are telling themselves stories, that are experiencing a lot of rumination, they tend to report lower levels of love in their relationship, lower levels of intimacy, and lower satisfaction. And this cost-inflicting strategy, as well as this cognitive and anxious jealousy, it's also related to different kind of love styles. People that are more anxious, more obsessive, but also people who play games, right? It's related to game playing in that sense. People who, when they feel jealous, they might try to evoke jealousy in their partner in response, or they might, sulk and pout and try to get their partner's attention, that sort of a thing. Insecure attachment, of course. Individuals with insecure attachment, particularly anxious attachment, they tend to feel more jealous, and high levels of jealousy also, again, they're associated with violence in relationships, intimate partner violence. They're also associated with infidelity. Why? Because when some people feel jealous, they cheat. They perhaps as an alternative mate, like, oh, I'm going to lose this mate, I better line another one up. Or it can be as revenge as well, right? Like, I think they're cheating, they're doing this or that, so now I'm going to go seek attention and whatever here as well, okay? So invoking jealousy in a partner can result in infidelity. Let's go on. What does this have in common? We've looked at jealousy so far. We haven't gotten into reactive jealousy. So, or retroactive jealousy, I should say. All of the jealousy we've covered up to this point is looking at jealousy in the present, right? You're typically jealous because of some thought, some rumination, some feeling that is describing your world at the moment, or a future threat, right? I could lose a mate. She's talking to him. What if she cheats on me with him? What about retroactive jealousy? Because retroactive jealousy describes jealousy about past events. And people can be jealous about past events. And past events might not pose any threat to losing a mate. They might not pose any threat to the current relationship. So you have an interesting manifestation of jealousy here, because it evolved as a mate retention emotion, so to speak, didn't it? And why then would we have this retroactive jealousy, this jealousy about past events that are done and over with and no longer matter, and they don't even threaten the relationship? Well, it doesn't have to be a reason. Jealousy can be evoked for anything, but something to consider. That's what we're going to be looking at going forward, is this jealousy of past events, retroactive jealousy. Let's go on. What are some examples of this? The body count discourse, right? Body count, past sexual partners. This involves retroactive jealousy. It's probably not the whole story, so some people will be like, oh, you're jealous or whatever. There are other things like disgust sensitivity, parental certainty. These are all things that might come into play, but even those things like parental certainty, those are evolutionary forces that would have driven perhaps the development of feelings of jealousy or even feelings of disgust in that sense. But disgust sensitivity over past sexual partners could also be related to, for example, a risk of disease, which might be why we see similarities in men and women as far as aversion to partners that have had many past sexual experiences, right? If it were only parental certainty, we might expect it to be much, much more common in men. But what we see across the research is that women tend to view promiscuity in men in the past about as negatively as men do. So that would make sense. There's reasons for that for both of the sexes. But jealousy comes into play, and men will tell you, that like they heard about a past partner or something and they can't get over it. And it doesn't even have to be a large body count, right? This can happen just with like one ex. So yeah, it's there. What else do we know? We live in a very unique environment with social media that exposes people to past events a lot, right? Someone's Facebook, their Instagram, a scrapbook of all of their past behaviors documented in photos. And that can evoke a lot of retroactive jealousy in ways that, a person might never have been exposed to. You can see the past partners. You can see their lives. You can see them in pictures, which may be especially salient for emotions, much more so than being told something or seeing it in text, for example. And given that, it might be an environment especially potent in evoking retroactive jealousy, which, is kind of what we see. So we're going to be looking at some research going forward to the next slide. This paper, Social Media's Role in Romantic Partners' Retroactive Jealousy, Social Comparison, Uncertainty, and Information Seeking. Let's go on. What do we know? From the sample in this paper, practically everyone experienced some retroactive jealousy. Okay, so very common. There was only one person in the sample that said they didn't care. People make comparisons with the ex, right? So upward, downward social comparisons. And there's a lot of research on social media and this effect of comparisons related to like body image, for example. You see a lot of beautiful people on social media. You feel worse about yourself. People do this with past partners, right? They see someone's ex and the ex is prettier than them or richer than them or whatever the case may be, and they feel bad about it. You have these digital remnants of past relationships thrown in your face. And this can create uncertainty about a relationship, right? Like, why me? Why am I better than them? Let's go on to the next slide. What do people do on social media to deal with this? Well, we know that they go on to people's social media and they look at all their likes. Who are they following? They see they're still following the ex. They look at all of their old pictures from 10 years ago, their old conversations that they had, their likes of photos and that sort of things. As I mentioned, they will compare themselves physically to the ex, right? And they can also kind of fact check information. So if you say, for example, our relationship was terrible, and it might very well have been, and they go onto social media and they see like a bunch of happy pictures, they might think, well, it didn't look that terrible. You're telling me it's terrible, but what does that mean, right? Or you said he was ugly, but he's, 6'5" and he's a giga chad. What does that mean? So these are things to consider, that people can kind of go onto social media and do these fact-finding missions that may help them or it may hurt them as far as their own retroactive jealousy goes. Let's go on. Here's some examples of these upward social comparisons that people make. These are quotations from participants in the study because this was a mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative. This participant, he said, they'll be with people who are huge or really successful, and that doesn't work out. And you're like, what are you doing with me? I feel like that guy could have been a lot better. So it makes me feel insecure a little bit. Yeah, social comparison. Here's another one. Looking at a picture, you could speculate a lot. You could come up with a number of things that aren't true. Like if I looked at a picture, I could be like, oh, they were about to get married. They were in Hawaii. They had like a perfect life. But if I asked her about it, I could get real stuff that actually happened. Yeah. So when people do these fact-finding missions, how those cognitions, remember, the cognitive element of jealousy play out can determine how people feel about it. If you look at someone's social media, you might see the old pictures and think, they had a great life. How do I compare to this? That sort of a thing. But people don't post often all of the terrible things about their relationships. Keep in mind, they're broken up for a reason. There's probably, a lot of negative stuff that is not being posted on social media. Next slide here, strategies. So some people want to know, and some people don't want to know. Some people know that they don't want to know, and some people don't know that they don't want to know. Okay, so they might get themselves worked up asking, even if, they really don't want to know. Anyway, here's what one of these participants said. I want to know as much as I can about someone's past, which probably doesn't help the situation. But I guess I just think about it. It would make me feel better if I knew. Even if it's like I found out stuff that would hurt me, eventually I would still feel better about knowing. If I went the whole time without knowing, I could just wonder about imagine worse stuff. So this is someone that says, it probably doesn't help me, but I gotta know, right? And if I don't know what happened, then I'm gonna invent things, okay? So this is someone that's probably fairly introspective. They know that it might not help them to know and dwell on it, but they have that compulsion, they gotta know. And that's something that people do when they're in love, in passionate love, that kind of first initial stage of love. Compulsive behaviors, they gotta know. And jealousy as well. Let's go on. People, how do they cope with this? One way that seemed common in this study is people can just cope by telling themselves that the ex is a terrible person. Here's what one participant said. In some scenarios, they'll be really pretty, but then you'll have also a group of girls who are like, oh my God, her nose is weird. Your best friend is like, she looks weird, just to sit there and comfort you. So it's kind of a cope. The good news about this cope is that your current partner probably does think that their ex is kind of terrible, or at least not as desirable as they look in the pictures. Why? Because they're still not together, right? Here's what someone else said. If she was ugly, I wouldn't care. I'd be like, LOL, bye. But if they were like pretty, I'd obviously try to be like, oh my God, find something wrong, even though there isn't, just to make myself feel better. So people will denigrate past partners, right? Which is what people do as well in intersexual competition. Denigrate competitors, rivals, and that sort of thing. And, the idea with intersexual competition is that makes the rival look worse in the eyes of others, but it can also be a coping strategy, kind of as we see here, can't it? Let's go on to the next. You don't need a big body count to invoke this retroactive jealousy. Here's a account from another man. He said, my girlfriend has only been in one other relationship, and it was in 8th grade, but I still had a hard time. It took me a while to get over that, even though it was in middle school. Basically just like wanting her to not have that emotional connection or physical connection with anyone except for me. So, one past partner, a girlfriend in 8th grade, maybe they didn't even have sex, but this one guy is still pretty hung up over it. They're probably pretty high in trait jealousy, given that, right? If they're still hung up over a past ex in 8th grade. But yeah, this retroactive jealousy, it can occur with a small body count, with anything like that. Let's go on. What do we know? What can we take from this kind of study? So one, no one wants to hear about your ex. Some people will say they do, and if they're a little bit more introspective, they might realize like, I probably really don't. It's probably not going to help. So it's a pretty universal experience. You probably don't want to talk about your ex very much in relationships or bring it up why there's no reason to do it. The reactions, though, they might vary if you do. Some people are going to get upset about it more. Some people are going to obsess about it more. Some couples, they can discuss their exes and all of that. Yeah. And some don't. But even if you are a couple that can, do you want to talk about that a lot? Maybe not. Photos, they're probably worse, as I mentioned at the beginning. They're perhaps, something we know about photos in research, they tend to evoke emotions a little bit better than other stimuli. So something to consider there, that maybe, this environment with a lot of pictures makes it a little bit worse. Let's go on. Managing this retroactive jealousy, how do you do it, and what do people tend to think about it? A common misconception with jealousy across the board is that like the onus is on the person who is jealous to just like work through it, right? This is kind of therapy speak and pop culture therapy that filters into the mainstream. Like, well, you need to go to therapy and work on it, honey. That's really not kind of the way that it seems to work with jealousy. Conscientious partners, they'll often avoid behaviors they know would evoke or induce jealousy in their partners. So a little bit related more to present jealousy, but it can also occur in the context of retroactive jealousy. I have a video on the Jonah Hill situation that talks about this a little bit more. But in relationships, the onus is not entirely on the jealous partner. Simply, well, don't be jealous anymore, And in the context of retroactive jealousy, social media and pictures, you might also want to ask yourself, like, do I need pictures of my ex from 5 years ago if it really upsets my partner? Is that more important to you? Do you care? Let's go on here. What kind of things then might these partners who are more conscientious do? Well, we know, again, no one wants to hear about your ex, which might also mean that if you are that conscientious person, you might not want to ask about the ex, right? You might not want to ask questions as much that evoke that jealousy. You might as well, because you might be curious. I'm not saying do or don't. I'm saying, just be mindful of the questions you ask. If you ask questions that evoke a lot of jealousy, then you might end up feeling jealous about things in the past that no one can change, right? This also means you probably don't need to keep keepsakes of your ex. You don't need to keep their underwear in your drawer or whatever the case may be. You probably don't need to keep the pictures for a long, long time on social media. And I know the Zoomers like to do this. Whole life on social media, it's like a scrapbook, but scrapbooks, they live in a box that's covered in dust in the attic. And so your grandkids can go through and see it. And they can say, oh, look, grandpa was a Chad. Look at all these women he dated. Okay, cool, I get it. You can go up there, once every 3 years and ruminate and look through these pictures and be like, oh, I was such a Chad. It's a little bit different on social media if you're kind of forcing everyone else to see those things, That can kind of cause problems. So might be something to consider. Do I need to keep that picture up? Or should I take that picture down and put it in a box? Let's go on. This kind of anxious and reactive jealousy, again, more related to present jealousy. You know, if you are a man, you probably don't need to follow a lot of thirst traps on Instagram and people that you don't know and comment on their posts and like their posts, you know. And, you know, if you're a woman or a man that's physically fit or whatever, you probably just don't need to post a lot of thirst traps. If you do these sorts of things, you will invoke jealousy in partners, most of them. And that simply is what it is. And if that's really important to you to like those kinds of things, follow those kinds of people, or post those kinds of things, you might have to find a partner that's very low in trait jealousy, who's kind of open to that. But many people won't be, and that doesn't mean that, you know, they're wrong or they're not enlightened or sexually liberated or whatever the case may be. It's actually quite normal. We know that social media is kind of a minefield for jealousy. There's a lot of research on how social media can impact romantic relationships negatively through these things, and also how social media can facilitate things like infidelity, right? People do end up talking and meeting on social media, so it's not a completely unfounded fear in that case. Let's go on to the next slide. When will people just not get over it, okay? If there's jealousy-inducing behavior in the present, they're not going to get over it. You continue to do the thing that makes them jealous over and over, you know, reasonably, realistically. It's easier to stop that behavior than it is for them to stop being jealous. With retroactive jealousy, you can't go back in time and undo something. It's already happened. So you kind of have to get over it, don't you? And you can, because it's not something that has to be put in your face all of the time, right? You know, if you have a partner who had past sexual partners, if it's just 1 or 1,000 or whatever the case may be, you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to focus on it, you know, or ruminate about it. But if it's, you know, you have a partner who's having sex with someone else every single day, yeah, then, you know, it's kind of like, obviously you're going to be jealous every single day for this continued behavior that keeps popping up in your life. Let's go ahead and go forward. Jealousy, you know, we think of it again in kind of pop culture, pop psychology, as kind of this pathological thing. Like jealousy in and of itself is bad. Probably not. You know, more people have these jealous cognitions and emotions as a trait. Some people simply have less. But if you go to a therapist for jealousy, you know, or you tell your partner go to a therapist, they're not just going to like make them not jealous all of a sudden. They're not going to unjealous them. So you're not going to fix this jealousy-inducing partner either in that sense, right? Often, you know, you will have to work together as a couple to kind of come to compromises in terms where you consider each other's feelings and what behaviors are inducing jealousy. And you might be surprised to learn that some therapists will simply say, can you not post those pictures? Can you stop just doing this if it's not important to you and it upsets your partner? Let's go on to the next slide. This is related again to that kind of boundaries discourse, because I've heard people, you know, particularly in the Jonah Hill context, they talk about boundaries as being something you can only set for yourself, but you can't tell the other partner what to do. I remember I had a conversation on Twitter and someone said, no, it's not boundaries if you tell a partner that they can't do cocaine or you will break up with them. You can't tell a partner, stop doing cocaine, because you're telling them what to do. All you can say is, I don't want cocaine in my life. And it's like, no, you know, you can actually set kind of rules for partners and say, you know, if you don't do X, Y, Z, I'm simply not going to be there. I'm out. So boundaries are dyadic. They're agreements that people come up with together in relationships. Rules that people set. Very often they're not explicit, but they're rules that emerge over time. Expectations that partners have from one another, that they learn about over time and that they meet with one another. In that sense, you get to pick in a relationship, don't you? The behavior that you might want to do as a single person versus partner satisfaction in a relationship and the behavior that might not be okay to them as a person in a relationship. Let's go on. What do we know about jealousy additionally, right? We know that jealousy is used kind of as a tool by more Machiavellian individuals to manipulate. We've talked about game playing, how people will use jealousy to evoke behaviors in partners to get attention from them. The red pill, it has something called dread game, right? Which is all about essentially evoking jealousy in a partner so that they're going to be more receptive to sex or that they're going to regain attraction to you. The idea of pre-selection, perhaps not in the research, but as it has filtered into discourse, is even another, might be kind of related to retroactive jealousy. A lot of people were interested in them in the past. So, can that make someone more attracted to you? So you will see guys, kind of pretending that they were more successful with women, or trying to cultivate that image in the belief that, women will think, he's a catch, someone could steal him away, or whatever the case may be. So important to consider and keep an eye out for this. Some people will try to make you jealous as a mate retention tool. It's Machiavellian, it's manipulative. You should keep an eye on that. Final thoughts, the last slide here. If you are a jealous person, think about it. Is your jealousy reasonable, or is it pathological? On the one hand, you don't want to be gaslit. If someone's doing something obvious that you're uncomfortable with, and you've told them, and it's very clear that it's crossing a line, it could very well be reasonable. But if you're just ruminating all day long about something and it's very ambiguous and you don't know, you might kind of be in that category of pathological jealousy. It's okay to modify behaviors that make partners feel jealous. Don't think about jealousy as like it's all on them, I can do whatever I want, and they just have to not be jealous. That's not going to work in most relationships. And retroactive jealousy, as a cognitive strategy, coping, you have to ask yourself, do I really want to know? Okay? And related kind of to body count again, I've done a survey on this. I asked men, do you ask? A lot of men don't. I think it was about 40%. Why? Is it because they don't care? Some might not care enough to ask, but some simply might not want to know. You probably don't want to think about other people. There's probably a lot of other things in the relationship you can look for if you're concerned about a past history of promiscuity, like would they cheat or whatever. You can probably see other behaviors as far as how they're behaving in the moment with you. So you do have to ask yourself, how far do I want to dig into the partner's past about things that would make you jealous? Because most people will experience retroactive jealousy, completely normal emotion, but do you want to consistently be evoking it in yourself? Anyway, that is all for this video. Hope you liked it. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and I will make another for you very soon.